Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Ryan, thank you. Barista.
Welcome for the coffee.
I appreciate you.
This is our second episode of the Kingsway Book Club. Kingsway Podcast Book Club?
Yep.
One of those.
It's our second episode, second book. We had to delay it a week because even though this book is called Simple,
Simply Christian,
it is not in my mind.
I think the next book we pick should be Christianity for Simpletons, based on how difficult this book was.
It was, so to be real,
But great.
If you read it, I'm so proud of you. And if you did read it, please come find me and tell me that you read it and give me your thoughts, because I really do want to know. Ryan would like that too.
Same.
I know he would. I know Ryan and I were joking about this. We're going to try to be as honest as possible, but at the same time, admit that maybe some of our actual opinions about the book. But in no way, as we talk about this, do I think this book in content alone is bad.
No.
I think the content is good.
I think before we jump too far in, the best thing I can say about the book, if you haven't read it, is you should get it, and you should get it in a format that you can read it chapter by chapter. So we both listened to the audiobook, and it just says chapter 1.
Yep.
What's chapter 1? I don't know. He just starts talking.
Yep.
Chapter 12. And I'm like, great. But what's really great about this book, he has a lot of great thoughts on all these different aspects of the Christian faith, on God's presence, on the Bible, on the story of God more broadly, on Jesus, on all this different stuff. What would be great is for you to own the book, and when you decide, when you have a question about, like, I feel like I don't get Jesus, or there's stuff I'm missing about Jesus, or stuff I'm missing about whatever, or like if God is all love, why would he disown people from heaven, or whatever. When you have questions like that, jump to a chapter in the book that talks about that, and then read that chapter. That's going to be an easier way to get into it than just trying to read all 200 whatever pages.
So I think that's a great way to use this book, almost like a reference or a resource to understanding to theology. So originally when I was reading this, we were thinking about reading this, I hadn't done any research on it. This is something you just picked. I told you before.
Also, let me just say, if you're watching the video, we don't have the book. No. I have Simply Jesus, and I'm hopefully going to blur out the second word on here and put Christian over it.
But it is, I know from reading previous NT Wright stuff that it's the type of like book that you read a chapter and then, or a page, and you just sit there for a minute. Like,
you got to think about it.
Wait. All right. Conceptually, I get what you're trying to say right here, but I don't know if I've ever held the whole thing like you're trying to get me to hold it. Perfect example of this is he sets this up with, at the very beginning, I have a little bit of notes here just to, they're not my notes, but they're the internet's notes. He just says this: people long for justice, spirituality, relationships, and beauty. And I think all four of those he said in the Christian God, which I love that he takes that polyamorous, like all these religions, takes this view of like
polytheist. Polyamorous is where you love a bunch of people.
Yes, sorry. Polytheist perspective of like involving a ton of different views on the world and how they see the world and how they answer those questions and how they arrive at those questions. It really does feel like he is like, he is not just showing you a corner of the bed. He is going to pull back all of the covers and show you the entire landscape of the world that you're living in.
He does a good job as a good European to be like, here are all these traditions. And in fact, he has this continuous frame of reference throughout the book where he talks about how to think about where God is.
Yeah, which is one of my favorite parts.
He calls it option 1, 2, and 3. And even in, I should say pages, but again, we both listened to it. Even in the last 30 minutes of the book, sets it up in the first hour or two.
Yep.
But in the last 30 minutes, he talks about option 1, 2, and 3. Pantheism, God is everything. Or
everything.
Panentheism, God is in everything.
Yep.
And then the second one is deism. God made the world and is just sitting back eating popcorn.
He's somewhere separate.
Unbothered by suffering and unmotivated to do anything about it.
Yep.
But then he sets up option 3, the Judeo-Christian worldview, where God is bothered by suffering.
And they're intertwined.
God did have full control of the world, and it was good. And when we asserted control, it was bad.
Yep.
And God wants to reassert control with us, not against us, but have us join him.
And that's why it's confusing in this world, because there's moments where heaven seems to be right here, and there are moments where heaven seems to be far, like nowhere close. And it's because they're intermeshed, intertwined, but it does mean that heaven can be found right now.
But that's why I appreciate about the way he started the book, even though it took me a while to understand what he was doing, probably because I didn't have the table of contents because I was listening to the audiobook. But it took me a while to understand it. But really what he's doing in the first 4 or 5 chapters is setting the table for what we're all hungry for and why Christianity answers that, why Jesus answers that.
Yep.
And so it's great. But as a Christian, you're like, okay, why are we talking about Hinduism? Why are we talking about panentheism?
Yep.
Why are we talking about sex? Why are we talking about whatever?
Yep.
And he goes through all these things that show the way we were made, the thing we're hungry for. And then talks about how God fulfills that.
Absolutely.
That's such a simple overview.
And it's really fun is I think that if you could, if I'm taking something away that was helpful for framing, that's the thing. Like, it's the idea of like how I view an interaction with God or an interaction with the world or how others view an interaction with God. I would almost, like, in a very healthy way, recognize that they have chosen one of those 3 categories as the way that they view the world. They find themselves going, yeah, I know there's probably a God. You know what I mean? And I would say probably the thing that pantheism, like the idea of like God is in everything and like life in itself and love, and like it's almost becoming like a mysticism like idea of just like, yeah, we're all God and like we're all a part of him and he's a part of us. And like I love how he talks about that with a specific example of like he heard that and at first it sounds great, and then he heard somebody talking about how like, yeah, the same spirit that's in a bunny rabbit would be the same spirit that was in Jesus, and he was like, I can't. I don't feel like those are equal.
And they're not. I had a conversation with a Christian panentheist recently, as in the past year. Did I say this last episode?
I think he's mentioned it recently. I don't know if it's last episode.
I'm going to repeat it because it has to do with this book, but keep it super short. But we all agree that God has something to do between me and the panentheist. That God has something to do with the creation of everything, not just people.
Yep.
We're made in God's image in a special way. But we are like, God also made bunny rabbits and also made inanimate rocks and whatever.
Yeah.
And so like we all agree God has something to do with it, and that God didn't make those things and leave no trace. But he would say that God's spirit indwells all those things or something like that. God is in those things, but maybe his spirit indwells us in a special way, but he's in everything. And I would say God's fingerprints are on everything. Just like, okay, a potter who doesn't have a wheel or something.
Yeah.
Like if they're just forming and molding, like making a sandcastle out of mud or something, you're going to have fingerprints all over the place, but you are not still indwelling that sandcastle, that clay mug or whatever. In that way, like we all agree that there's something to that, but I think there are big issues that Christian panentheism brings up. The N.T. Wright also brings up, but it also simplifies it in an unhelpful way.
Yeah. Well, and I think what ends up happening is you find limitations because then that would mean that the bunny rabbit could be your savior, you know, like, or your rescuer. Like it doesn't have like this same...
Or that God came to... I was about to say something that I was going to disagree with. God came, and N.T. Wright says this in the book, to restore all creation.
Yeah.
Part of that restoration is restoring us to be God's delegated authority on the earth.
Yeah, and I think it breaks down what I mean though is like you can't gain anything outside of like that small understanding. That just means that all the answers then are inside of you, and that you need to just discover this thing that you're connected to in a deeper way, and you will somehow find your way through.
Yeah.
It can easily break down when you start to go like, yeah, but some people seem to have a different, like an evil, like they give into it. So it really starts to, but what I mean though, is like when I interact with people that they may not even know that that's the view they have.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's
they just
not.
go on assuming it.
Yes. And I think what he does a good job, especially at the very end of talking about, was like, how the difference between someone that sees God as separate and not involved, or maybe every now and then when he feels like it, getting involved, versus a God that we have access to and that is present, that I think is way more common in the Christian world than I think we're comfortable with. Like it truly is at times muddied.
So here's my thoughts on the first 4 chapters or so. While they're great, I think if you're already a committed Christian, you can skip the first 4 or so chapters, look at the table of contents and verify that you're skipping over the right amount of stuff, over the people's hungers, general worldview stuff, and how Christianity is the best option of those. And you can skip right to the story of Israel or whatever is the next thing after that. But if you feel like you have a shaky grasp on Christianity or no grasp on Christianity, or maybe in some of what we've talked about, some of those things do apply. God's real, God's out there, but he doesn't care. Or God's real and God's out there and he's in everything. He's in my best friend, he's in my milkshake, and he's in my worst enemy, all in the same exact way. And he was in Hitler or whatever. Like, there might be some issues with that.
And I think he does such a good job, though, in those first, I will say the first chapter actually pulled me in because he talks about this voice that we all hear. And I really enjoyed that thought, because I find that to be true. We all may deny it, or maybe not listen to it closely, or maybe at times it goes silent for longer than we would want. But I had this image in my head of these 2 worldviews, and I may do it in a sermon at some point, but this picture of prayer that came to me where it's like God's on top of like the roof of my life, or in like a separate car than me, and like I'm trying to talk to him, but he doesn't seem to see me, and he seems to be distracted in his own little world, and he's around me, so I know he's real, but he doesn't seem to be in control of anything in my life. Doesn't seem to be interacting, and every now and then I bump up against him, or I almost get caught by him, or he seems to be further away than closer, versus all of a sudden turning. And I think that third worldview is like he's in the passenger seat, like he's in my car, in my world, and it's merely me who has gotten distracted by looking out the windows or turning on the you know what I mean? And like, rather than him being in a separate place.
And I think that's that thing that happens in the first chapter, talking about those different voices, and then the next 3, 4, however many chapters, he sets up this phrase he says throughout the entire book, and I think it's a phrase that every single person can identify with. He talks about God wants to set the world to rights. I don't know how that grammar works, but
it's
hopefully you get the picture that, like, we all know not everything is right in the world. Not everything is good in the way it should be, and God wants to set the world to rights. If he's a panentheist or a pantheist, if that theology is correct, then God already is in everything. Like, it's sort of right in a way. That's a really weak statement.
Well, anything evil is just something good twisted. You have to remind yourself that. Anything evil is just something good twisted. What I mean by that is it's not wrong to want to have sex. It's wrong to like rape. Demand it. It's not wrong to desire to have nice things and to like to live in luxury. It's wrong to be greedy and to take and to steal from others.
It's not wrong for somebody to do better than you. It is wrong for you to hate them or kill them or hurt them.
Yes. And so, I would challenge you to think about this, because it actually helps you sometimes realize that you're not far from making the right decisions. Often you know the right, you're just twisting it for your own selfish plans rather than recognizing what love requires, which is how we maintain relationships with each other. That's why love is always the best law. It's because what does love require of you is one of the easiest questions to change the quality of your life and the quality of the life of people around you. So,
and that's sort of where he goes from chapter 4 or 5, talking about all these things, is he starts to talk about the story of Israel and how God actually interacts with us and interacts with the things that we see are wrong. And so he talks about how from the beginning, God made the world and God made it right. And under his leadership and rulership, it flourished. But the first sin was trying to take away that crown and say, we should be leading the world. We should be an authority over it in our own kind of way, not in God's kind of way. Because God already wanted us to be, have dominion over the earth, not domination, but but I'm in charge and I'm going to be here to prune the bushes and to feed the squirrels and whatever. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
But there's that. When we get in charge in our own kind of way, we break the world. And so the whole Old Testament is God seeing that brokenness and not wanting that pain and that chaos to keep flourishing and hurting everything that he's made, people and bunny rabbits and terrain and whatever. And so he does a couple things to try to fix it himself, but in a way that respects our free will. It's out of control, or see if we'll fix it ourselves overall, and then we won't. And then he sets aside Noah to be the first rescue boat to the drowning world. And Noah gets drunk and has some weird sin stuff, and it's weird. And it all goes wrong. And then Abraham and his family are going to be the new rescue boat, and they mess up, and he lies about his wife. And then Isaac, and then he messes up and lies about his wife in the exact same way.
Wild.
And then he messes up. So maybe it's going to be Esau. Wait, no, it's going to be Jacob because he steals his birth. So the whole story of Israel and this chosen people thing is not to exclude a bunch of people and to say, I'm going to set up a compound out in the woods, and that's going to be where the only good stuff happens, and I hate everybody else. It's that he's trying to set up all these special groups of people so that through humanity, who he wanted to have good, flourishing, benevolent dominion, he could send a rescue boat out to the drowning world. And the whole Old Testament is him trying over and over and over and giving us more chances than we deserve until we get to the New Testament and he sends Jesus himself. He is God. The Father doesn't send himself. But Jesus even says, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. They're one in essence. They're both God. But he sends the Son out to be the unfailing, unrebellious, loyal, obedient rescue boat for everybody. That's a great way to summarize the story that also holds in tension the true purpose, like we talked about with Shane Wood on our two-part podcast. God's pursuit of us is the single most telling thread throughout all of Scripture. It explains some of the violence, not that it was good, but why he's trying to pursue us and our free will to love him back. It explains a lot of the failures and why scary, gross stuff is in the Bible. And it explains why Jesus is so vital. And that it was God drawing close to us the most. And so that's why I appreciate it. He talks about that again, summarizes it really well in the second to last chapter, I think, the story of the Bible.
Which I love. All right, so let's get to some nitty-gritty, because I think we've explained. The book is very, by subject matter, simple, by dissection, very thorough, if that makes sense. And so one of the things that I love that I actually feel like was one of the things that I really enjoyed was his description of why baptism is so beautiful. And drawing it to Genesis 1, this idea of your life being like this formless void, this broken thing, and then the Spirit hovers over and brings order to your chaos. So setting all things right? And then he just draws through the whole Bible how water and spirit have played like roles through all these things, through the flood, through Moses separating, out of the Exodus, and then Joshua walking across the Jordan, and having all these moments over and over and over again that have to do with this delivery of taking you somewhere out of where you were, that you were in trouble, out of Egypt, out of the desert, and bringing you into something completely new by the power of his Spirit. And it just so happens to be through water. And I just thought that was so cool, because then John the Baptist does the same thing. And then even Jesus does the same thing. Following the Spirit and using John's baptism. And so for me, it makes the beauty of baptism make sense. If I don't know if I've ever taught that or talked about that in that way with baptism, where I'm like, if you could imagine that God sees all the beauty that could be on the earth, and his hovering Spirit is over the deeps of your heart. And if you give him permission, he would bring order to your chaos. And it is the exact same message that Jesus brings in Revelation. And it's like, it's wild. He's going to set all things right, make it all things good.
Set all things to rights, as the smart British man said.
Anyway, that was wild. I enjoyed that.
I appreciated that, even how he talked about Jesus' crucifixion as his baptism. Now, he had his real baptism from John the Baptist, but he talks about how Jesus' own crucifixion was him being submerged into death. And there are a lot of Christians, even ancient Christians, you listening to this may be weirded out by what I'm about to say, but there are a lot of ancient Christians who believe that Jesus descended to hell, not the judgment place necessarily, but the place of the dead.
Yep.
And then rose again from that. So in one of the earliest Christian summaries of the truth of our faith, they wanted to put it all in one place. And if you confess this thing, you believe and are a part of our family, and you believe all the right stuff. It's called the Apostles' Creed, shortly followed up by the Nicene Creed, which is very similar but expounds on some stuff. But they have these statements about Jesus submitted to death, even death on a cross or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then he descended to the dead, or he descended to hell. Yep. On the third day, he rose again. That N.T. Wright kind of ties into, and also so does Paul and a lot of the New Testament, into baptism. That the question of, well, should I get baptized? I don't know if I want to. Like, in a very weak and fragile way, sounds like Jesus saying, Father, is there another way? If so, take this cup from me. And God's like, this is the way.
This is the way.
And Jesus actually dies and then actually is raised to life by the Father. In that deep way, we get to participate in that same thing with Jesus, just in being dunked in water. It's so easy, but it's also the ceremony by which we're adopted into God's family. It's sort of like foster parents who have a foster kid, and they have a court day where they adopt them. Mm-hmm. It's their adoption ceremony. Was that kid in their house before? Yeah. Did they consider that kid a part of their family before? Probably, but they didn't know if he was going to be taken away or whatever. That adoption ceremony isn't just a public declaration that I'm a part of their. No, it's like the books in heaven have rewritten your last name. You are in the Lamb's book of life. There's a solid transactional thing that happens at baptism. Not saying that God can't save you if you haven't been baptized, if you die in a car crash on the way there. Not saying that baptism has some magical power over it, but it's a deeply personal, powerful, important moment to God when you get baptized, in a very similar, if not the same way, that Jesus' death and resurrection was a very deep, personal, powerful, important moment to the Father.
Absolutely. And I love that he ties it in a way that it's trying to connect you to the story, like to the overarching story of what God's been doing from the very beginning. This isn't just something randomly new that God just was like, I just have him get wet. It's like, no. Yeah. And it's like John 3, when he's talking to Nicodemus on the roof, and he says, you must be born again. You're born of your mother, and then you're going to be born in the Spirit. And Nicodemus is confused because his mom's dead and she's old, and he's like, how come somebody be born again? And Jesus is trying to gently tell him, like, this is how much of a drastic change following me will take. It will take almost like you're starting over. Mainly, I think he's teaching Nicodemus that because he has to let go of all that he knows, like a newborn, and join a new world. Like the things that he knows is actually hampering him, but it's also a demonstration and a description of salvation. Did you have anything else that popped out to you that you were like thinking through, or had something that kind of stuck with you?
I had a few. It felt like by the end, he had built on so much stuff that he was almost rapid firing great ideas. Uh-huh. And so in the last hour and a half of the book, I started writing a bunch of stuff down.
Yeah.
So for instance, he had the part, this is like chapter 12, 13, something, a couple before the end, just talking about the Bible itself. He even said, like, if you're a Christian and you know all this stuff, you can skip it. Yep. But I just kind of like skipped around before moving on to that more of what he was saying about it. And he was talking about the inerrancy of Scripture. And I don't remember who he quotes. Some like 19th century, 20th century like theologian or something. But he's talking about inerrancy and is it literal, or is it metaphorical, or is it literary? And those have the same root word and should mean the same thing, but they have such slippery definitions. Like, what does it mean to take poetry literally? Does that mean you take it incorrectly, or does that mean you take it according to the meaning it should have had? And he goes through Daniel even, parts of Daniel that are prophetic and apocalyptic, and he's like, well, we take the beasts to be not literal beasts in chapter 7, I think, maybe 9, but 7. we think that the readers would not have been looking over their shoulder for a literal lion and bear and whatever, and then the 10-horned thing. But they did take the time and it to talk about real things like nations. And a lot of them thought it was Persia or Syria.
But they did take it for sure. There was 4 of them. That's a for real thing.
Yeah,
like,
so even in that, like, oh, they didn't take the Bible literally. Yeah, if they did, they would have gotten it wrong because it wasn't a straightforward meaning. Bear didn't mean bear.
Yeah.
But anyway, you just have to be a smart reader of it. So he was talking about inerrancy, and he quotes this guy who says something along the lines of talking about the snake in the garden. And he said, it doesn't matter if the snake was real or not. It matters what the snake said.
Yep.
Which kind of gets to the point of the Bible. It isn't about being a cowboy with your leather cross-torso belt full of bullets. Look at all these true facts I have that I can fire at people. Yep. It's more about how can God meet me, critique me, encourage me, correct me through the pages of Scripture. So talking about spiritual readings of the Bible, which I've been talking about a lot in the past year and a half.
Yep.
He talks about Lectio Divina for high church, Anglican, Catholic kind of people, where you read the Bible spiritually. You read it and you become a character in one of those stories and see what God is trying to tell you through slow reading and prayer and whatever. Similar to some ways that evangelicals and low church traditions, that doesn't mean bad church. More means like less formal. You don't wear a suit and tie to church, probably. To how they try to read the Bible spiritually and apply it and think about it with God.
Absolutely.
More than being literal, historically, security camera accurate, God is trying to use the Bible to say something to you. And it's probably not something literal, especially in the Old Testament. It's probably not go out and kill the tallest person you see.
Yeah.
If you're reading David and Goliath, that's probably not what God means, because that goes against his son.
Well, and that's what I loved about how he approached some of that stuff, because he says some things in there that I think would be very controversial to the idea of like I think God is
controversial to people who grew up with the Bible is inerrant and infallible in everything I think it means.
Yep. And I think that's the line that he had at one point where he said, what's happens, and I'm probably going to get this misquoted, but it's close to this, where he says, what happens is people get less concerned on what the Bible is teaching and what it has to say in your own life, and more concerned about knowing more than the person next to you.
Yeah.
And more concerned about proving to the person next to you that it's trustworthy, rather than actually living your life as if it was trustworthy.
Yeah.
And so he basically just says you become scholars of the trustworthiness of the text without ever being like livers, like doers, embodiments of what the text teaches. And I think there was a 2 or 3 moments in the book where like he said a line like that, and I was like, this is a guy that can speak multiple languages, that has written all these books. And yet he's basically telling these readers that read these books as scholarly works. Like, you should probably spend less time reading my books and more time just doing what you do. And I was like, for him to say that, that's like self-sabotage to his genre of writing. And so he must really believe it, because he is one that has written some of the most, I would say, trustworthy writings on like Paul. I know his book on Paul, I've had it recommended for years because it's one of the best, I think, non-biased, just general approaches to Paul. There's one quick thing in this that I thought of that I thought you would think is kind of fun, that I don't know if you caught it. He was talking about Daniel, and that's why I brought it back up to me. In Daniel 9, there's this idea of how long it'll be before God comes back, and it's 7 times 70.
Yeah.
And
I think in the original language, it's 70 weeks of years.
So
70 times 7.
70 times 7. But what he said is they took that as literal for a while until Jesus said it to Peter. And then they reevaluated it to mean forgiveness will go as long as it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never connected those two before. So Jesus isn't just randomly picking.
It's the same number.
It's the same number. And when he says that to Peter, because Peter says, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? I believe it's in Matthew's gospel. And Peter's looking for like fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. You know what I mean? Like, where's the one where I get to like say no more?
Yeah.
And Jesus, we think, is giving him just this absurd amount of times of forgiveness. But if you knew Daniel and you knew the connection there, Jesus isn't saying an amount of forgiveness as in times. He's saying an amount of distance or an amount of length that forgiveness must be extended. And it is until the end. Like forgiveness never stops, basically.
Yeah.
And
if they caught that.
If they caught it. Which I was like, that makes so, like, that is a Jesus juke out of Jesus jukes. You know what I mean? Because, like, a teenager's like, okay, well, I'll keep track. Like, how big's that number, 492? Okay, well, I'd probably be at some point. You know what I mean? Like,
I can get him now.
I can get him now, you know?
Yeah.
And whereas Jesus was trying to attach it to the idea that this is actually what his last point is in the book, which is the idea that, like, we don't have to wait to get to this kingdom. We are now a part of it and extending it. So forgiveness will always be a part of this world because that's what my kingdom is all about. Yeah. And so that to me was the best. That's the best part is like, we think especially now, we need to break out of the matrix, right? Like we got to get out of the like algorithms and all this stuff. And I think that easily bleeds into our spirituality or our Christian theology. And I think what he does such a good job at the end of saying is like, to do that is actually to realize that your actions right now have eternal impacts potentially.
Yeah.
And you're playing a role.
And I've heard people talk about this before, but the way he said it was so powerful to me. He talked about life after death. I didn't stutter or repeat myself unintentionally. He talks about we have life, and then we have life after death. That's, some theologians call that the intermediate state, like how it could be how in the Transfiguration, and I think Matthew 17 or John 17, one of the 17s.
Matthew 17, Transfiguration.
Jesus pulled Elijah and Moses onto the mountain with him. Did he pull them from their own time, or were they dead and with the Lord, and he pulled them down for a minute? But that's the idea, that died and gone to the Lord, but also the world isn't set to rights yet in N.T. Wright's verbiage. And so there's life after death. But then when God sets everything right, that is life after death.
Yeah.
It's when everybody's there who should be there. And so he talks about this vision of life after death. He quotes "This is my Father's world," which is a great hymn, and I love it so much. This is my Father's world, skipping a couple lines, and talking about Jesus, us doing our best or something like that, till heaven and earth be one.
Yeah.
And so that didn't really explain my point very well. That's just my notes. But the thing I'm trying to say is, like, what does that heaven look like? It doesn't look like us in lazy boys with harps, sipping Sonic Route 66 drinks or whatever.
No.
It looks like us exercising godly rulership and taking good care, being good stewards of the world and each other, us all sacrificially loving each other and lifting each other up. And so that vision of where you're going can be true right now. You can do heaven. You can do some heavening right now in how you treat other people. Don't hold grudges against people you're going to be in heaven with. Try to restore, try to work towards healthy, flourishing relationships with those people. That vision, that like truly knowing the gospel and responding to the gospel looks like being changed by the gospel. And that's something that we get really confused in the Midwest because there's so much fluency in Christianity that it's kind of become numb. And it's okay to say, I'm a Christian. I don't tithe. I don't feed the homeless or give anybody water who's thirsty. I don't clothe the naked. I don't visit those in prison. I don't visit the sick. I don't call in on my relatives when I know they're not doing well. But I'm a Christian. And he's like, have you met Jesus?
Yeah.
Do you know how much Jesus cares about that?
And I think that's where what's funny, like, I know we've been talking about this for a minute, but I don't think I understood the title of the book as I was reading it. I was like, this is not simple.
Yeah.
Like, and I kept thinking, why would you call this and then go this? And I think what he's trying to get you to is that it feels this complicated, but where it ends is the idea that we're simply supposed to be Christian. Like that's how the world is restored. That's how these kingdoms come together, these two, heaven and earth. And the Christian work, it's simply being Christian and not being,
right.
all these things, all the, the world. It's just, no, like this is the simple plan, is to be a simply Christian and to reflect Christ and to be like Christ and to do what Christ did and to be like his, gate to,
this
whatever.
sort of bleeds into some John Mark Comer. He has a book called Practicing the Way.
Yep.
It's kind of long-ish, but it's really like 50 plus super short, like couple page essays on Christian practices and doing whatever. And it's kind of the point of the book. It's a culmination of a lot of his work and a lot of other people's work, is just to say that like you can't take a part of this and say it's the whole, and that the transformative thing for you in the world is Jesus and being transformed into him. You can't just know about Jesus. You have to be enamored with Jesus, be in relationship with Jesus. And being in relationship with Jesus, here's a really stupid example. When I was in high school, I knew my favorite chips.
Yeah.
Second favorite chips was just dry tortilla chips, and I'd just eat them like a garbage
psychopath?
disposal. Yes, like a psychopath.
Like a psychopath.
I would go home and drink a Mountain Dew and eat an untoasted, uncut cinnamon raisin bagel, and then just tortilla chips till I pass out.
That's a lot of carbs.
Anyway, so I'm doing great now. But my favorite chips were sour cream and cheddar chips.
Yeah.
Still one of my favorites.
Ruffles.
Yep. And then I'm hanging out with one of my friends in high school. I'm at his house. We're playing Halo 2 or 3 or something like that because we're super cool.
Because you were cool.
Super cool.
Better times.
And he goes to the gas station. I like this guy a lot. He goes to the gas station and he gets Gardettos. And I was like, what's that?
Yep.
And he was like, it's like trail mix, but different.
Yep.
I was like, cool.
With no raisins.
And I try some of it. And apart from how much I would normally like it, my respect and admiration for this person led me to like give it more grace than it was due. And now I like Gardettos, especially the super dark rye chips. I never would have liked that if I didn't follow that person into liking that. And that's sort of what it's like with Jesus. You can't be like, I'm close with Jesus. I'm going to heaven. I'm a Christian. I'm a Jesus follower. Also, I don't know what kind of chips Jesus likes, and I don't care.
I actually don't like the chips he's offering me. Yeah.
In what world? So it's part of your proximity is like, that was a really stupid example, but leads to this. If Jesus deeply cares about the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, the widowed, the orphaned, how can you stand by and know Jesus really well and talk to him all the time and be a deep, great Christian and do nothing and care not at all?
And I think that if I took away anything from this book, it was basically just trying to strip away, with much like Shane did, much like we tried to with Matthew 24, is to strip away all the things that we get hung up on that we think being a Christian is all about, or we get distracted by thinking this all about, and really just hone in on this concept of like, God is setting all things right, and that rightness is going to look like love, and that love came through his son fully displayed. And if you want to be a Christian, you're simply following that example. Yeah. And you're helping in that work.
We just had this conversation partly based off of a reel you showed me, but talking about how Christians a lot of times want to show up with the truth and just logic people into the truth.
Yeah.
And it may be fully true.
However,
it's not going to be believable when you walk up saying Jesus things without doing Jesus things, down to the priorities in your mind that I want the best for this person and I love this person, and some of the impure things that are in their lives that have been done to them or that they've done or that they're holding on to right now as a crutch won't scare me away. They aren't so strong that they'll scare me away from loving this person. That's a Jesus attitude on top of kindness out the gate.
Yep. That's
you can't. what was the reel you just showed me? What did he say? Those so like
he's like, you can't possibly look like Jesus when somebody sees you coming and they find you insufferable. Like it's this idea of like, what if evangelism, people are drawn to you because of your loving kindness, generosity, your patience, the way you treat people. You're so attractively like almost magnetic in that way that people love being around you.
Yeah.
And he said the problem is when we just stand on street corner and hand out our logical things or we tell people our truth, it makes us like almost they don't want to be around us. Like that's not helpful to their life in any way.
It communicates, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that we care more about what we're telling them than we care about them.
Absolutely.
It's the same sort of care that a multi-level marketing person has, that a cult has, that a whatever. It's like, it would be great if you got like drugged into this. And it's N.T. Wright talks about it at the end of the book, a revolution of kindness, that like Jesus so deeply cared for the world that he didn't just show up and preach the gospel about how he's going to die and then raise again. He did a lot of kindness, a lot of seeing people in their pain and addressing it and healing them and ushering them in to be in relationship with him and to belong and have purpose. And this whole person attitude. He didn't just care about their eternal destiny. He cared about their current status, their current location. And so like it gets to what N.T. Wright's saying in the book about kindness, but he, and also us in our conversation, talked about how that's not it. We don't do kindness and then we're done.
No.
So it's always both and, but you can't tell somebody about Jesus living a mean, untransformed life and hope that they get it.
Absolutely.
Have any reasonable expectation that they get it. God might do something mighty and work beyond your insufferability, but you can't say Jesus changed my life and be a mean stick in the mud
Look
who
like
hates
nothing
everybody
that they want to change into
and is afraid of their favorite things.
Yep.
They're a smoker or vape or whatever, and you're like, ew, gross.
Yep.
Which maybe I'm not a huge vaping fan, but like you can't be disgusted by people actively to their face and also have them understand that you love them.
Absolutely.
And
there's a quote.
That's not something they want to be transformed into.
No. And there's a quote I read a couple weeks ago that was anonymous, and I wish I knew who had said it, but it said that the best strategy for Christians right now is not to offer kindness to the world, but unworldly kindness.
Yeah. And
I was like, ooh, and it's a kindness that goes beyond what this world says is kind. It's a revolution of kindness that listens and hears the pain of other people. And as Timothy Keller said in the other reel that I said, that John Mark Dyer, who's a great follow on Instagram, John Mark Dyer, great follow. And he says that it's in access to those moments and events and current places of pain in the people around you that the gospel truly becomes good news. And then your like logical explanations of faith and why you should listen to Jesus and live like Jesus enters in as it's intended to be. Good news.
Yeah.
It's supposed to enter in as good news.
You have to want it to be true. I'm pretty sure what the guy said. You have to lead with emotions because you have to want it to be true before you can accept that it's true.
Yep.
And it's not that Christianity is only based on emotions, but that Jesus being good news doesn't matter until you know that it's good for you.
So here's the wild thing. You ready?
Yeah.
He says this in another clip, but the clip that we're talking about so attaches to the end of this book. It's the idea that like Jesus, whenever he convinced somebody to follow him, he convinced them by accessing their deepest moments of pain. So he talks about the woman at the well, the guy that couldn't see, the man that was
caught in adultery.
Yeah, woman caught in adultery, the man that was possessed. He heals their pain and then brings them the good news of who he is, right? Every time he doesn't have the opportunity to learn about the pain and just logically explains, no one follows him. So Pharisees, the rich young, anytime no one will give him access to the thing that would make there's no transformation, even with Jesus face to face. It's like it doesn't work, and yet we are convinced that like that's the startup. And I think that's why I love where listen, a scholar of scholars is N.T. Wright. does not end with read more books, does not end with you need more information. He ends with you have the simple plan of Christianity. It is a revolution of kindness that changes the world when you fully understand what it's all about.
There's a book that sort of gets at the same idea. I don't think we're going to ever do it in our book club. It's called Outflow. I don't remember who it's by. I had to read it in college for something, maybe a personal evangelism class or spirituality or something. But imagine like a bird bath fountain sort of thing with 3 tiers. Sort of looks like a cake stand with 3 tiers. That water comes from the top and flows to the middle and flows to the outside and then I don't know what happens over the edge or in holes are in it. I don't really know how those things work.
Back to the top.
Anyway, through a circular thing. And that the moving water is the only way the water stays clean. The moment the water's stagnant, it's done. It's grody. You've seen the pond in Mount Vernon.
Yep.
It's, how do you describe it? Scummy, green, stinky, gross. The moment it's
waiting
not
for Ninja
pouring
Turtles
out
to come out of it at any moment.
So either it's stagnant water holding on to everything it can. People have described this as fat Christians. You're eating everything that God's feeding you and handing none of it to your neighbor. Not using any of it, working any of it out. You're just sitting down and eating forever. But
a Christian hoarder.
Either you're a Christian hoarder, scummy pond with unmoving water, always just wanting to be full but never give any out, or you are only giving out and never being refilled. And so you are bone dry and there's nothing left. The thing that God desires is an outflow, that you've seen God's kindness to you. You've been transformed by it to realize, maybe in a way that Gen Zers, Gen Alpha would understand it. God's the main character. You're not. Anymore. God's rescue plan is the main storyline. You're just a side character in that. Not an extra, but a side character.
You're joining in, but you're not.
And so you're both intaking and outputting. That's the only way you have fresh water worth drinking.
Absolutely.
Is God's continually pouring into you. You're making sure to keep that line of pouring open. You're talking to God, communing with God, going to God when you're sad or happy or whatever. And you're pouring it out. That's what we mean with like, don't give the truth in anger and resentment and disgust. That's an untransformed life. You're giving them water that's gross to drink. And also, don't just be kind absent of any Jesus. It's great to be super kind, and then somebody's like, you're so different than everybody I know. And you're like, it's because of Jesus. Jesus changed my life.
Just a wild thing to just throw out here as we close this down. But I was listening to a guy talk about this I'm not going to get this right.
Burning Man.
No, it's the biblical group, the research group. Berean? No. Berean, thank you. I was like, I cannot say that word right now. But it's Berean. And they came out with this...
Barna?
It's Barna.
Okay,
Thank
I was like,
so much.
I just threw out a Bible name.
Barna. It's Barna.
Barna. Yeah.
I think that's why I was trying to. I was like, it's not that word, but it's this.
I feel
word.
that.
They came out this research, so they're asking like, what are the habits of people that feel like their faith is being productive and moving forward? Not that they're perfect or that they feel like they don't have issues, but like, what do their rituals or habits look like? And it was crazy research. So they said people that read or studied or prayed or interacted with God once or twice a week saw minimal change in their life. Minimal. And then at 3 times a week, they saw, I think it jumped to like 10 to 15% of people found that there was some change in their life. But they said the biggest jump was 4 days. Now, it's not to say that you shouldn't do it every day or whatever, but they said, and what the research they were drawing the conclusions from was the moment that God entered your week more often than not was when 70% of people felt like their life started to be transformed or changed for the benefit, not just in morality, but in confidence and in peace and in feeling like they were equipped and that God was close. And they said that it was crazy that the minute that the world had less days than God, their life started to change. And so I do think it's that simple to create routines in your life. 5 minutes, a prayer every morning, a prayer every evening. Just changing the radio station can really make a difference if that's never something you've done. That's not the only thing you should do, but it really can change the input silence can be one of the easiest things to start with.
Silence with God.
Silence with God is wild.
Not just finally my kids are at school.
N.T. Wright talked about the importance of memorizing a prayer. And the beauty of just having the words, not having to worry about it, and praying them sincerely.
Whether it's the only thing you pray, and you pray it a lot in repetition, whether it's the springboard to start prayer, to give you somewhere to be, or whether it's the wrapping up, concluding, summarizing part of a prayer.
Oh, and if you don't know where to start with it, just read through Psalms. Like that.
Also, the Lord's Prayer. We did a whole big thing on that.
We did a whole thing on that. We did, and it is
Jesus didn't get it wrong.
No, and the fact that he recommended it proves too that he thought it was a valuable thing to learn. So anyway, that being said, I hope that maybe this book was encouraging to you, or at least our rambling was, if you didn't read it. No more N.T. Wright books for a while, okay?
Yeah, I'm going to outlaw N.T. Wright. We're going to pick even easier books from here on out, because this was kind of a big ask. Now, I've said before, we have 4 criteria we try to pick. Make sure at least every book fits 3 of them. It's under $15, under 200 pages, and under 6 hours on Audible. And it has an audiobook, and it's generally low level. This next one doesn't have an audiobook.
Oh no.
But I'll read it to you. But it's really good. I just read it in the past couple months. Our next book is going to be The Gospel Precisely. Surprisingly good news about Jesus Christ the King. Here's the good news about this book. It is 124 pages.
Wow, that's pretty small.
That's all the pages, so it's less than that. It's like right under 100 of content.
Cool.
So it's not crazy. It's a super easy read. It is on Kindle, if you have a Kindle. It's a great book. I love it so much, and it agrees with N.T. Wright as it talks about the gospel, what the gospel is, what it contains, and what are just implications of the gospel. Cool. Things related to it but aren't. I don't want to spoil anything, but great book.
Last thoughts on Simply Christian. I'm excited about this next one. Yeah. I will say, if you're, I don't want to be too negative. It is a dense book. It is not a simple book in its intensity.
It's not a light book.
It is not a light book. And so if you're thinking about reading it or you wanted to read it, I would highly recommend maybe you pick something else first if you haven't read anything like this.
Or pick and choose.
Or if you want to read this, just recognize that you may be taking a chapter and then walking away from it for a little while. It may not, we had to power through it, and we were cheering each other on because I was like, this is intense. I was like, this is a lot of
stuff.
We're
just texting each other 4 hours to go.
Oh my gosh. Felt like I was back in college is what I felt like.
Yeah. Trevor at one point was listening at 2.5 speed. I don't know how human beings can listen to that.
Yeah, I should play a section just so you can hear how I was listening to it, because it was that crazy.
It's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah, I got to go back a chapter here so you can hear a section.
Yeah.
Here it is at 2.5 speed, which it's Josie's fault that she showed me it could even go that fast, because I didn't know it could even go that fast until last week.
The New Testament picks up from the Old the theme that God intends in the end to put the whole creation to rights. Earth and heaven were made to overlap with one another, not fitfully, mysteriously, and partially, as they do at the moment.
What?
I told Ryan that I can only do that if I have my earbuds in and no one else is around. Otherwise, I can't do it.
Driving to Springfield
Driving
or
to
whatever.
Springfield, I can do that. But if anyone else is around or whatever, my ADHD is... It's too strong. I can't do it. But I that's how I can listen and maintain. I would maintain. So I probably listen to half the book that way.
I don't even comprehend.
Well, thanks so much for listening. And if you did read the book and you liked it, feel free to leave a comment or like and share. You can always email us or find us here at the church and tell us that you enjoyed it. Or if you hated it, just let us know what you didn't like. Any other thoughts or things?
No thoughts.
No thoughts. We've said all the thoughts. As always, you can rate the podcast or share it with friends. We always appreciate that. And looking forward to next month's book.
We're going to try to do it right at the beginning of April. I know that's only a couple weeks away, but we got slowed down with this one. And there's one I want to hit after Easter so bad.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. We'll just plan on that.
I'm pretty sure it's out. It might not be out.
Well,
maybe it's not.
Hopefully it is.
Yeah, it's out.
Yeah, we're good.
Wait. Yeah, it's out. We're good. Okay, great.
Well, good. Well, we'll see you guys next time, and have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya. Get out this Lego car right up here.
Oh my gosh.
say that this book is just like Mere Christianity. Super dense, about 200 or some pages. About the basics of the faith, but in a way that's so hard to understand.
Well, in the context of Mere Christianity being right around World War II
Yeah.
and like the bombings and all that stuff, it gave it a lot of like context to some of the stuff.
I'm gonna go back through personally